Hey there, rednecks, preppies, redneck preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great? Good. You know, a question that I'm getting asked a lot lately is, Redneck Preppy, is the age of cheap and easy collecting of military surplus firearms finally over? And my answer is yes. As always, thanks for watching, take care, and bye-bye. What? I have to expand on that answer? Fine. Okay, so I guess I have to flesh out that opinion. First, let's be honest, the true golden age of military surplus collecting happened a long time ago. Exactly when is debatable, but it was in fact another era. We've just been living in the afterglow of the past few decades, so returning to the age of easy, which is to say cheap, collecting isn't possible. Many of the people watching this video weren't even alive when that era occurred. Now, although many of us look back fondly upon, sub $100 Mosin Nagants and SKS 45s, AG 42Bs that only cost $200, and Lee Enfields that were even less than that, the reality is those prices are inflated compared to what you would have been paying for surplus firearms decades before that. That said, collectors of military surplus firearms seem to hold out hope that these days of $600 SKS 45s, $2,000 M1 Garands, and $1,500 Kar 98Ks are only temporary, and that prices will eventually drop again, as they did for several Kalmbach firearms back in the 2000s when the market was flooded with several waves of material coming in from countries looking to convert old firearms into money. I'm going to give you some very bad news. Prices in a general sense will never go down again. Prices are only going to continue to rise. Eventually, even the so-called underpriced firearms will jump in cost as collectors mine the last remaining examples of cheap surplus. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is simply there is no new supply. Traditionally, what held down prices and even occasionally dropped them was periodic importations of firearms from former communist bloc and other countries around the world looking to get rid of surplus military firearms. There are no more surplus military firearms. The surplus market effectively ran dry several years ago, and what we're now in is what's called the secondary market, where it's largely owners selling firearms to other people. Now, I don't mean to say that we won't see occasional imports of firearms from other countries, but we've already seen that outside of blips like Philippine M1 carbines or Ethiopian sewer pipes, there isn't much of anything left out there to import. There's a few reasons for that. Most countries have laws strictly governing what kind of firearms civilians are allowed to own, not to mention international treaties designed to limit the trade in arms. And most countries moved on to select fire weapons decades ago. When those rifles are surplus these days, they're either destroyed, sold to another nation's military, or provided as aid. In countries like the United States, you might see some parts kits come in, but that's about it. When it comes to firearms we are allowed to own, the few countries remaining that have stockpiles of those firearms have kept them as a just-in-case policy. Ukraine, for example, has piles of Mosin Nagants, SKS 45s, and SVT 40s, some 11,000 in the latter's case, but they've kept them in case they needed them. And those firearms, along with crew-served machine guns from World War II, are being used at this very moment by second-line troops in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Those rifles, plus huge stocks still in Russia, will never grace our shore. Second reason I like to refer to is money is no object. Another reason why the new reality of higher prices is permanent is because we as collectors have signaled we're willing to pay the price. Everyone laughs when they see like a surplus rifle go for way higher than the expected amount on Gunbroker or some other auction. But what they sometimes fail to recognize is that those rifles are consistently selling for those amounts. You can stick your thumb in your suspenders and say, I remember the days when you could pay for an SKS 45 and a Spam can of ammo with a nickel and have enough left over for a bus ride home. But that day is gone. In the past 5 to 10 years, the prices of some rifles have more than doubled, and people are still buying them. And the finished auction prices that I've been tracking the past few years seem to indicate that there's still room for growth in retail prices. Scary. And even if we had a decent supply of new rifles, why would retailers price them significantly lower than current retail? There are people out there who are willing to spend $600 on an SKS 45. Why would a retailer sell them for $200? We, the consumer, have signaled that we're willing to spend the money. You can't blame a retailer for agreeing to take it. The third reason is what I like to refer to as I know what I got. Somewhat related to retailers knowing what we're willing to pay are the countries knowing what these firearms are now worth. Back in the 1990s and 2000s, a lot of countries, particularly those in the comm bloc, wanted to convert old surplus into money or just be rid of the stuff that was taking up space. And with an incomplete knowledge of the market, or perhaps an immature market, they dumped this stuff for cheap. Well, that's not a thing anymore. If you have an internet connection, you can find out what the going rate of a firearm is anywhere in the world. SKS 45s are going, at retail, for nearly $600 in Canada. Mosin Nagant M9130s are sitting at about $550. Any country looking to sell those rifles to an importer in Canada, for example, isn't going to take a couple of bucks each and all of the ammo that can be carted away. They're now expecting importers to cough up near retail prices for those rifles. And if one country's importers aren't willing to do so, another one's will. They know what they got. So even if retailers were inclined to lower prices for a fresh shipment, they just simply might not be able to because their cost per firearm is so high now. The next reason is what I like to call holding on. It's also hard to get a deal from non-retailers. The same internet connection that a government can use to find out what their surplus is worth works for the individual as well. I've seen people walk into a gun store with various desirable surplus firearms to try and sell, only to walk away when the store offers less than retail. Well, that store has to make money too, right? So they either keep it or end up selling it privately for closer to retail. Yes, there are still some deals to be had from people who inexplicably can't be bothered to do some research to find out that M1 carbines don't cost $80 anymore, but those people are increasingly rare these days. That high price, of course, is better stomached compared to when an estate
idiotically hands in the firearms to police for destruction because they can't even be bothered to sell them.
Reason 5, ammunition. This is only tangentially related to the firearms, but the price of surplus ammunition has also skyrocketed in recent years. It wasn't long ago when you could buy spam cans of 7.62 Russian for almost nothing. Surplus .303 British was still a thing, and the brave could shoot as much 8mm Mauser from Egypt or Turkey as they wished. Now, even if you own the firearms, shooting the damn things costs far more than it used to. Military surplus firearms often aren't a cheap day at the range any longer. These days, the only cheap-ish surplus is Chinese, and even that's not going to last much longer due to supply and increasing regulations and sanctions. So, are there still firearms out there that you can get into cheap? Sure. As the Blind Sniper pointed out recently in a video on this very same topic, Mausers from South American countries are still pretty cheap. They may not have the war provenance, but they still have some interesting stories, and there are plenty of types and variations to keep you really busy. Italian Carcanos, used in both World Wars, are still pretty cheap. Don't sleep on them, or one day you're going to be seeing that formerly $200 and $300 rifle going for double or more. You can also find surplus firearms in calibers that are difficult or impossible to find ammunition for at reasonable prices, and your definition of that might vary. But I've seen those prices start to move lately as well. At the end of the day, it pains me, but military surplus collecting has probably moved out of the reach for a lot of people of more modest means, who previously bought these rifles not only as collectibles, but perhaps for, practical reasons. Plenty of deer and hogs have been taken down by SKS 45s, plenty of moose and bear with M9130s, SVT 40s and Mauser rifles, plenty of... you get the point. So it's depressing to say, But in my opinion, the day of easy and cheap collecting has finally and definitively concluded. With the price of many milsurps now rivaling the cost of modern and more capable brand new firearms, the case for buying surplus firearms is diminished unless you're all about the history. And if you have a solid collection of firearms and bought them before the run-up in prices, I strongly suggest you keep them. At any rate, despite the down note of this video, I hope you at least found it somewhat entertaining and vaguely informative. As always, if you have a military surplus firearm, think very carefully if you're going to try and sell it, or bubba it, which you shouldn't, because you're not going to be able to replace it at that price. Take care, and bye-bye.